Wikipedia says the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP, is a University of Alaska Fairbanks program which researches the ionosphere, the highest ionized part of the Earth's atmosphere. The most prominent instrument at HAARP is the Ionospheric Research Instrument, a high-power radio frequency transmitter facility operating in the high-frequency band. The IRI is used to temporarily excite a limited area of the ionosphere. Other instruments, such as a VHF and a UHF radar, a fluxgate magnometer, a digisonde, which is an ionospheric sounding device, and an induction magnometer are used to study the physical processes that occur in the excited region. Work on the HAARP facility began in 1993. Initially, HAARP was jointly funded by the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Navy, the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. The narrative is that its original purpose was to analyze the ionosphere and investigate the potential for developing ionospheric enhancement technology for radio communications and surveillance. Now, no mention of the weather, is there? Let's see. Let's type it in. Weather. They use the word conspiracy. Anytime you see that word conspiracy, a lot of people's first instinct, per the programming, is to joke, laugh, poke fun at, assume that that poisoning of the well is legitimate, and of course it's a fallacy to poison the well. So why would you take that narrative and run with it? Don't you know the origins of the usage of the weaponization of the word conspiracy in the 60s by the CIA? Isn't that common knowledge now? Why would anybody take that word and use it as permission to appeal to the stone, another fallacy, as permission to dismiss without researching further yourself? That's foolish. Let's see. Weather. 10 out of this rather large, several page document, only 10 mentions of the word weather. And it's all under conspiracy, interestingly enough. However, let's go to this old document I found. You can't access it anymore except through the Wayback Machine. You can see the website is csat.au.af.m/2025/index.htm, and it's titled Welcome to Air Force 2025. That's the year we're in, by the way. Future study conducted 1995 through 1996 for the Air Force Chief of Staff. Now, in case you're wondering the context, is this to do with the U.S. Air Force? Well, Volume 4, Chapter 1, it says, pass to extinction, the U.S. Air Force in 2025. So your answer is yes, it is. And you can see here it says Chapter 15, Weather as a Force Multiplier, owning the weather in 2025. Now, this is a huge document, so it is unlikely that this was spoofed. In the year of its capture being, let's see, where did I capture this? January 4th of 2007. The Wayback Machine's a useful tool. There have been problems with it in the recent past, whereby vast droves of information were deleted from it. Wonder why that was. But we can at least count on it for things that are still in its archives. I love the Wayback Machine. I use it all the time. I use it to archive my own stuff. It's a wonderful way to archive things, at least in terms of as far as you can trust it. You know, obviously you can't trust it all the way because they've recently had problems with losing data. Any case, let's try typing. Just so you know, I clicked on that link and I preloaded it because it takes a long time to load. So I went down here, I clicked Chapter 15, and that's where we are now. Let's type weather. Weather, where it's mentioned 256 times. Weather as a force multiplier. This 52-page document, it's mentioned 256 times. Now, over here, this looks like some kind of a, you can see the word ridiculed. So that looks like a hit piece offhand. Crazy weather, that's just another metaphor for conspiracy, right? Isn't that what you've been taught, programmed, to believe that that conspiracy and crazy are the same thing? Crackpot, that kind of thing. But when we go to the official documents, this document, which is how many pages was it? 52 pages long, being just one chapter in this enormous volumes and volumes of pages thing. It's mentioned 256 times. So subchapter 2, required capability. Why would we want to mess with the weather? What do we mean by weather modification? The global weather network, applying weather modification to military operations. Opportunities afforded by space weather modification. Artificial weather. Global weather network. The military system for weather modification operations. A core competency roadmap to weather modification in 2025. A systems development roadmap to weather modification in 2025. Now we're on to the 13th word, weather. In 2025, U.S. Aerospace forces can own the weather by capitalizing on emerging technologies and focusing development on those technologies to war-fighting applications. Such capability offers the warfighter tools to shape the battle space in ways never before possible. It provides opportunities to impact operations across the full spectrum of conflict and is pertinent to all possible futures. The purpose of this paper is to outline a strategy for the use of future weather modification systems to achieve military objectives rather than to provide a detailed technical roadmap. A high-risk, high-reward endeavor, weather modification offers a dilemma not unlike the splitting of the atom. While some segments of society will always... Now they mention that splitting of the atom, that's actually a tongue-in-cheek. This goes back to the Manhattan Project. Have you ever heard of that? This goes back to Nikola Tesla. You ever heard of that fellow? That is a tongue-in-cheek. Weather modification offers a dilemma not unlike the splitting of the atom. While some segments of society will always be reluctant to examine controversial issues such as weather modification, the tremendous military capabilities that could result from this field are ignored. At our own peril. From enhancing friendly operations or disrupting those of the enemy via small-scale tailoring of natural weather patterns to complete dominance of global communications and counter-space control, weather modification offers the war fighter a wide range of possible options to defeat or coerce an adversary. Some of the potential capabilities of weather modification system could provide to a war-fighting commander-in-chief are listed in Table 1. Let's go on down the rest of our weather words. Nope, I read that already. Technology advancements in 5 major areas are necessary for an integrated weather modification capability. Number 1, advanced nonlinear modeling techniques. 2, computational capability. 3, information gathering and transmission. 4, a global sensor array. So that's global, you guys. And 5, weather intervention techniques. Some intervention tools exist today and others may be developed and refined in the future. So now next we went to some kind of an appendix. It says space weather. That's interesting. I didn't know space had weather. I wonder what they mean by that. But in the subheading it's improved communication reliability, intercept enemy transmissions, revitalize space assets, space weather, disrupt communications and radar, disable or destroy space assets. Space weather, that's interesting. Detect hostile weather activities. So it follows that if the U.S. Air Force was doing this back in the 90s, that there are other countries doing it also, and they're probably either, well, it depends on what your beliefs are, but they're either working together or they're competing against one another to manipulate the weather. Current technologies that will mature over the next 30 years will offer anyone who has the necessary resources the ability to modify weather patterns and their corresponding efforts, at least on the local scale. On the local scale. On the local scale. I'm going to get to that soon. Actually, that's the whole incentive I had for starting up what I'm doing with this. This was very spur of the moment. I'm tired of seeing tornadoes in the mountains where I grew up. That's not possible, folks, and that's what's happened recently a number of times in Teller County, home of a number of strange occurrences over the years, including statistically impossible things. I'll get into that also. Current demographic, economic, and environmental trends will create global stresses that provide the impetus necessary for many countries or groups to turn this weather modification ability into a capability. So there's local, and there's regional, and there's global pretenses for this. In the United States, weather modification will likely become a part of national security policy with both the domestic and international applications. Our government, so again, this document is definitely talking about the U.S. Air Force. Our government will pursue such a, and I'm not trying to disparage the whole of the U.S. Air Force at this time. I think it has mostly to do with rogue sex, if you want my opinion of the Air Force. So I will add that caveat. I'm not anti-Air Force. I am anti-rogue sex of Air Force at this time until further knowledge comes to mind. And it says, our government will pursue such a policy depending on its interests at various levels. I'm against, sorry to pause again, I'm against unlawfulness. That's what I'm against. I don't know about you, but I think unlawful rogue sex of the U.S. Air Force ought to be taken to tribunal. That's how I really feel. Continuing, these levels could include unilateral actions, participation in a security framework such as NATO, membership in an international organization such as the UN, or participation in a coalition. Assuming that in 2025, that's our year again, you guys, you folks, you good people, our national security strategy includes weather modification. Its use in our national military strategy will naturally follow. Besides the significant benefits an operational capability would provide, another motivation to pursue weather modification is to deter and counter potential adversaries. Now you have to ask yourself, the Constitution, I believe it was the Constitution anyway, there's a place in our founding documents that talks about all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, what happens when rogue sects of your own government attempt to convert turn their weapons in on the American people? And it's a simple question. It's enumerated in our founding documents. It's been done before, hasn't it? What are the odds that they're referring also to turning this technology on their own people? And what happens further when you, if you ever read that book, Economic Hitman? If you ever read that book, let me pull that up for you. I was lucky enough or unlucky enough to read that. John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I was putzing around Europe when I read this. First edition. And you can't find the first edition anymore. I wish I'd held on to it because the second edition is different from the first. But if you can find the first edition, and I'm not saying this particular one here is I'm not saying one way or the other what version that this is, but I am saying that you're going to have a hard time finding the original version of it. In any case, this gentleman talked about how essentially when you have a growing, I'll use the word military industrial complex to paraphrase, but when you have a, hold on, economic hitman. Let's see what eBay says about it real quick. Version 1, revision 1. When you have a, oh, that's the new one. Where's that? I'll let you see what I'm doing. Sorry. First edition. Let's try that. You can still get it for, well, including shipping. It's quite a pretty penny for that book. So, and it, first edition, signed, $175. First edition, second printing. I wonder if that means that they changed it. Sometimes that can mean that, but that copy costs us over $115. You get the idea. You want to try to get a hold of that first edition because those older editions, those newer editions rather, are going to be different from the original. But when I read that original, when I was putzing around Europe, he talked about how this machine will go around and they will set up, for example, they'll offer to build an airport, and that country will incur a great deal of debt in order to build out that airport, and they know in advance they're not going to be able to pay back that debt, so they refer to themselves as jackals. And if I recall correctly, the book toward the end talked about how eventually you run out of other countries to exploit, so of course naturally you start exploiting your own people. And I'm of the opinion we are entering into an era where that turning in on our own people was averted. The crisis was averted, at least for the time. I'm sure it will come back. Eisenhower warned about it a long time ago. Beware the military-industrial complex. But it might have something to do with this, at least in the local area. Whether they were starting it or finishing it, or they were stalled out and now they're just trying to cover their bases or consolidate. I don't know. But I did do quite a bit of research on the subject, having been displaced not once but twice. I did take it upon myself to build out how I would do it, how I would build a canal, and how I would build a canal that ran right through the mountains of the Rockies. So this gentleman right here, my current opinion is that he's doing right by us. That's my current opinion. That is subject to change. But before him, I wasn't very happy about the way things were going. And it seemed like there was no, and to date, as yet, there's still no way to enter into the judiciary, in my opinion, and resolve my grievances amicably, whereby our family was displaced not once but twice. So that's sort of why I spun off and started 2 media companies. In any case, check that website out if you're ever interested, zchg.org, and then type in Colorado Canal, a love story. Let's continue, shall we? Our government will pursue such a policy depending on its interests at various levels. These levels could indicate unilateral actions, participation in a security framework such as NATO, membership in an international organization such as that of the UN, to misread, or participation in coalition. Assuming that in 2025 our national security strategy includes weather modification, its use in our national military strategy will naturally follow. Besides the significant benefits an operational capability would provide, another motivation to pursue weather modification is to deter and counter potential adversaries. And again, those adversaries may very well be the American people. Just depends on what your beliefs are, I suppose. In this paper, we show that appropriate application of weather modification can provide battleship dominance to a degree never before imagined, battle space dominance, In the future, such operations will enhance air and space superiority and provide new options for battle space shaping and battle space awareness. The technology is there, waiting for us to pull it all together. In 2025, we can own the weather. The weather modification capabilities described in this paper are consistent with the operating environments and missions relevant for aerospace forces in 2025 as defined by Air Force and LR, a long-range planning office report to the CSAF based on the AF/LR PowerPoint briefing. Air and Space Power Framework for Strategy Development, which is JDA-2LR.PPT, which is PowerPoint, if I recall. General Gordon R. Sullivan said, moving into the 21st century, America's Army and Modernization, Military Review, July 1993, quoted in Mary Ann C. Graves and Richard Zimber, apologize Richard, without a force multiplier, Military Review, November-December 1995, 75. Let's continue. Current technologies that will mature over the next 30 years will offer anyone who has the necessary resources the ability to modify weather patterns and their corresponding effects, at least on the local side. Current demographic, economic, and environmental trends will create global stresses that provide the impetus necessary for many countries or groups to turn this weather modification ability into a capability. In the United States, weather modification will likely become a part of national security policy with both domestic and international applications. Our government will pursue such a policy depending on its interests at various levels. These levels could include unilateral actions, participation in a security framework such as NATO, membership in an international organization such as the UN, or participation in a coalition. Assuming that in 2025 our national security strategy includes weather modification, its use in our national military strategy will naturally follow. Besides the significant benefits an operational capability would provide, another motivation to pursue weather modification is to deter and counter potential adversaries. You betcha. In this paper, we show that appropriate application of weather modification can provide battle space dominance to a degree never imagined before. In the future, such operations will enhance air and space superiority and provide new options for battle space shaping and battle space awareness. The technology is there, waiting for us to pull it all together. In 2025, we can own the weather. What an odd thing to say. I thought they were just doing communication stuff. The weather modification capabilities described in this paper are consistent. Did I read that already? Yeah, I did. And I apologize if I read that over. We might edit that out, we might not. Maybe I read it twice for emphasis, you know. Meteorological analysis reveals that equatorial South America typically has afternoon thunderstorms on a daily basis throughout the year. Our intelligence has confirmed that cartel pilots are reluctant to fly in or near thunderstorms. Therefore, our Weather Force Support Element, or WFSE, which is part of the Commander-in-Chief's CINC Air Operations Center, or AOC, is tasked to forecast storm paths and trigger or intensify thunderstorm cells over critical target areas that the enemy must defend with their aircraft. Since our aircraft in 2025 have all-weather capability, the thunderstorm threat is minimal to our forces, and we can effectively and decisively control the sky over the target. So this has undertones to me of controlling lightning. I don't know about you. The WFSE has the necessary sensor and communications capabilities to observe, detect, and act on weather modification requirements to support U.S. military objectives. These capabilities are part of an advanced battle area system that supports the warfighting CINC. In our scenario, the CINC tasked the WFSE to conduct storm intensification and concealment operations. The WFSE models the atmospheric conditions to forecast, with 90% confidence, the likelihood of successful modification using airborne cloud generation and seeding, using airborne cloud generation and seeding, using airborne cloud generation and seeding. That's chemtrails, boys and girls. In 2025, uninhabited aerospace vehicles, or UAV, are routinely used for weather modification operations. By cross-referencing desired attack times with wind and thunderstorm forecasts and the spot satellite's projected orbit, the WFSE generates mission profiles for each UAV. The WFSE guides each UAV using real-time information from a networked sensor array. Prior to the attack, which is coordinated with forecasted weather conditions, the UAVs begin cloud generation and seeding operations. The UAVs disperse a cirrus shield to deny enemy visual and infrared surveillance. Simultaneously, microwave heaters create localized scintillation to disrupt active sensing via synthetic aperture radar systems, or SAR, such as the commercially available Canadian Search and Rescue Satellite Aided Tracking, SARSAT, that will be widely available in 2025. Other cloud seeding operations cause a developing thunderstorm to intensify over the target, severely limiting the enemy's capability to defend. The WFSE monitors their entire operation in real time and notes the successful completion of another very important but routine weather modification mission. This scenario may seem far-fetched, but by 2025 it is within the realm of possibility. The next chapter explores the reasons for weather modification, defines the scope, and examines trends that will make it possible in the next 30 years. And I remind you, it's always possible that they had the technology when they were writing this report. Let's read this now. It's from Nikola Tesla Unplugged. The U.S. patent 685,957, issued in 1901, outlines an insulated metal plate linked to a capacitor set at an acute angle. This innovative design was purported to gather electric charge from radiation originating beyond our planet. Tesla envisioned harnessing this energy for practical use. And it's captioned, innovative patented devices designed to capture and harness cosmic rays as radiant energy. Now, doesn't that look an awful lot like the modern grid, or portions of it? And doesn't it follow, if they're able to capture that radiant energy, are they also able to disperse that radiant energy? And doesn't it look an awful lot also like this array, which is the poster child of the quote-unquote conspiracy? Doesn't it? And couldn't you convert a grid, which looks very similar to this array, couldn't you convert a grid array to have the appearance of only consumer grade stuff, but actually in fact have weather modification capabilities? Let's look at it really quick. So we're going to type in grid electrical. Let's see if we can get some nice snappies of that. Here's one. So, 1 or 2. 1 or 2. I don't know. You tell me. Use your discernment. Have they converted or weaponized our grid? Let's continue. Uh-oh, I might have lost my place again. That's why I should probably be using this as my tracker. Begin cloud seeding, we read about that. Weather modification mission. And a lot of this you can of course read yourself. Yeah, we read that. Let's go on. Required capability. That's going to be interesting. Why would we want to mess with the weather? Chapter 2. According to General Gordon Sullivan, a former Army Chief of Staff, as we leap technology into the 21st century, we will be able to see the enemy day or night, in any weather, and go after him relentlessly. A global, precise, real-time, robust, systematic weather modification capability would provide warfighting CINCs with a powerful force multiplier to achieve military objectives. Since weather will be common to all possible futures, a weather modification capability would be universally applicable and have utility across the entire spectrum of conflict. The capability of influencing the weather, even on a small scale, could change it from a force degrader to a force multiplier. And it goes on to say, people have always wanted to be able to do something about the weather. I need to be more disciplined. In the U.S., as early as 1839, newspaper archives tell of people with serious creative ideas on how to make rain. In 1957, on how to make rain. So they're not just talking about warfare here, folks. They're talking about controlling food. That's the clear pointer to me. In 1957, the President's Advisory Committee on Weather Control explicitly recognized the military potential of weather modification, warning in their report that it could become a more important weapon than the atom bomb. That's a huge statement. However, the controversy since 1947 concerning the possible legal consequences arising from the deliberate alteration of large storm systems meant that little future experimentation could be conducted on storms which had the potential to reach land. In 1977, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution prohibiting the hostile use of environmental modification techniques. The resulting Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification technique, or ENMOD, committed the signatories to refrain from any military or other hostile use of weather modification which could result in widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects. While those two events have not halted the pursuit of weather modification research, they have significantly inhibited its pace and the development of associated technologies, while producing a primary focus on suppressive versus intensification activities. The influence of the weather on military operations has long been recognized. During World War II, Eisenhower said, "In Europe, bad weather is the worst enemy of the air operations. Some soldier once said, the weather is always neutral. Nothing could be more untrue. Bad weather is obviously the enemy of the side that seeks to launch projects requiring good weather, or of the side possessing great assets, such as strong air forces which depend upon good weather for effective operations. If really bad weather should endure permanently, the Nazi would need nothing else to defend the Normandy coast." If really bad weather should endure permanently, the Nazi would need nothing else to defend the Normandy coast. You don't have to extrapolate too much, do you, folks? The impact of weather has also been important in more recent military operations. A significant number of the air sorties into, isn't that a great word, into Tuzla during the initial deployment supporting Bosnian peace operation aborted due to weather. During Operation Desert Storm, General Buster C. Glasson asked his weather officer to tell him which targets would be clear in 48 hours for inclusion in the Air Tasking Order, or ATO. Excuse me. But current forecasting capability is only 85% accurate for no more than 24 hours, which doesn't adequately meet the needs of ATO planning cycle. Oh, here we introduce the weatherman, don't we? The weatherman might also be involved in this. Over 50% of the F-117 sorties weather aborted over their targets, and A-10s only flew 75 of 200 scheduled close air support missions, or CAS, due to low cloud cover during the first 2 days of the campaign. The application of weather modification technology to clear a hole over the targets long enough for F-117s to attack and place bombs on target or clear the fog from runway at Tuzla would have been a very effective force multiplier. Weather modification clearly has potential for military use at operational level to reduce elements of fog and friction for friendly operations and to significantly increase them for the enemy. Now it goes on to say, what do we mean by weather modification? Today, weather modification is the alteration of weather phenomenon over a limited area for a limited period of time. Really, so this was written in the 90s, and it says today, weather modification is the alteration of weather phenomena over a limited period for a limited period of time. And it cites number 9. Within the next 3 decades, the concept of weather modification could expand to include the ability to shape weather patterns by influencing their determining factors, and that cites 10. Achieving such a highly accurate and reasonably precise weather modification capability in the next 30 years will require overcoming some challenging but not insurmountable technological and legal hurdles. Technologically, we must have a solid understanding of the variables that affect weather. Excuse me, I had to check the time really quick and I lost my place. We must be able to model dynamics of their relationships, map the possible results of their interactions, measure their actual real-time values, and influence their values to achieve a desired outcome. Society will have to provide the resources and legal basis for a mature capability to develop. How could all of this happen? The following notional scenario postulates how weather modification might become both technically feasible and socially desirable by 2025. Between now and 2005, technological advances in meteorology and the demand for more precise weather information by global businesses will lead to the successful identification and parameterization. I thought it said paramilitarization, but it says parameterization of the major variables that affect weather. By 2015, advances in computational capability, modeling techniques, boy that's happening already, and atmospheric information tracking will produce a highly accurate and reliable weather prediction capability validated against real-world weather. In the following decade, population densities put pressure on the worldwide availability and cost of food and usable water. Again, they're mentioning controlling, there's undertones of controlling or having oversight over our food and water supply vis-a-vis the weather. That's what that tells me loud and clear. Massive life and property losses associated with natural weather disasters become increasingly unacceptable. I hope so. I really do. These pressures prompt governments and organizations who are able to capitalize on the technological advances of the previous 20 years to pursue a highly accurate and reasonably precise weather modification capability. The increasing urgency to realize the benefits of this capability stimulates laws and treaties and some unilateral actions, making the risk required to validate and refine it acceptable. By 2025, the world, or parts of it, are able to shape local weather patterns by influencing the factors that affect climate, precipitation, storms, and their effects, fog, and near space. These highly accurate and reasonably precise civil applications of weather modification technology have obvious military implications. This is particularly true for aerospace forces, For while weather may affect all mediums of operation, it operates in ours. The term weather modification may have negative connotations for many people, civilians, and military members alike. It is thus important to define the scope to be considered in this paper so that potential critics or proponents of future research have a common basis for discussion. In the broadest sense, weather modification can be divided into two major categories: suppression and intensification of weather patterns. That makes sense. Suppress or intensify. In extreme cases, it might involve the creation of completely new weather patterns, attenuation or control of severe storms, or even alteration of global climate on a far-reaching and or long-lasting scale. In the mildest and least controversial cases, it may consist of inducing or suppressing precipitation, clouds, or fog for short times for a small-scale region. Other low-intensity applications might include the alteration and or use of near space as a medium to enhance communications, disrupt active or passive sensing, or other purposes. In conducting the research for this study, the broadest possible interpretation of weather modification was initially embraced, so that the widest range of opportunities available for our military in 2025 were thoughtfully considered. However, for several reasons described below, this paper focuses primarily on localized and short-term forms of weather modification and how these could be incorporated into warfighting capability. The primary areas discussed include generation and dissipation of precipitation, clouds and fog, modification of localized storm systems, and the use of ionosphere and near space for space control and communications dominance. These applications are consistent with CJCSI 3810.01, or meteorological and oceanographic operations, and that's citation number 11. Extreme and controversial examples of weather modification: creation of made-to-order weather, large-scale climate modification, creation and or control of steering of severe storms, etc., were researched as part of this study, but receive only brief mention here because, in the author's judgment, the technical obstacles preventing their application appear insurmountable within 30 years, which is Cite 12. If this were not the case, such applications would have been included in this report as potential military options, despite their controversial and potentially malevolent nature and their inconsistency with standing UN agreements to which the U.S. is a signatory. Interesting. So it's enumerated in UN agreements, and it is potentially malevolent nature. You don't say. On the other hand, the weather modification applications proposed in this report range from technically proven to potentially feasible. They are similar, however, in that none are currently employed by or envisioned for employment by our operational forces. They are also similar in their potential value for the warfighter of the future, as we hope to convey in the following chapters. A notional integrated system that incorporates weather modification tools will be described in the next chapter. How those tools might be applied are then discussed within the framework of the concept of operations in Chapter 4. And it goes on to show these citations, which I will capture for you, but I ain't going to read that. Well, maybe I said read anything. I'll read number 12. That is interesting. Concern about the unintended consequences of attempting to control the weather is well justified. Weather is a classical example of a chaotic system, i.e., a system that never exactly repeats itself. A chaotic system is also extremely sensitive. Minuscule differences in conditions greatly affect outcomes. According to Dr. Glenn James, a widely published chaos expert, technical advances may provide means to predict when weather transitions will occur and the magnitude of the inputs required to cause those transitions. However, it will never be possible to precisely predict changes that occur as a result of our inputs. The chaotic nature of weather also limits our ability to make accurate long-range forecasts. The renowned physicist Edward Teller recently presented calculations he performed to determine the long-range weather forecasting improvement that would result from a satellite constellation providing continuous atmospheric measurements over a 1 kilometer squared grid worldwide. Such a system, which is currently cost prohibitive, would only improve long-range forecasts from the current 5 days to approximately 14 days. Clearly, there are definite physical limits to mankind's ability to control nature, but the extent of those physical limits remains an open question. Let's read portions of this too. Chapter 3, System Description. Our vision is that by 2025 the military could influence the weather on a mesoscale, or greater than 200 kilometers squared, or microscale, immediate local area. Hear that? They can affect it locally, or they can affect it regionally, to achieve operational capabilities such as those listed in Table 1. Where's Table 1? Let's try to remember to go to that in a second. The capability would be the synergistic result of a system consisting of, number 1, highly trained weather force specialists, WFS, who are members of the CINC's Weather Force Support Element, or WFSE. Number 2, access ports to the Global Weather Network, GWN, where worldwide weather observations and forecasts are obtained near real time from civilian and military sources. Number 3, a dense, highly accurate local area weather sensing and communication system. And number 4, an advanced computer local area weather modification, modeling, and prediction capability within the area of responsibility, or AOR. Number 5, being proven weather modification intervention technologies. And 6, a feedback capability. Highly trained weather force specialists, access ports to the Global Weather Network, a dense, highly accurate local weather sensing and communication system, advanced so that's prediction. Do they talk in this about creation of that weather? Communications network, real-time weather observations, that's the weatherman's type of thing. I don't think anybody has a problem with that on its face, but of course we're not just talking about communications, and we're not just talking about prediction. Weather prediction, read that on your own time. Boy, drawings back then were kind of fun, weren't they? It's like clip art. Kind of miss clip art. Let's see. Data gathering. Oh, here we go. Applying weather modifications to military operations. How will the military in general, and the U.S. Air Force in particular, manage and employ a weather modification capability? We envision this will be done by the Weather Force Support Element, or WFSE, whose primary mission would be to support the warfighting CINCs with weather modification options in addition to current forecasting support. Let me try to skip ahead. Oh heck, I'll just read it. Although the WFSE could operate anywhere as long as it has access to the GWN and the system components already discussed, it will more than likely be a component within the AOC or its 2025 equivalent. With the CINC's intent as guidance, the WFSE formulates weather modification options using information provided by the GWN, Local Weather Data Network, and Weather Modification Forecast Model. The options include range of effect, probability of success, resources to be expended, the enemy's vulnerability, and risks involved. The CINC chooses an effect based on these inputs, and the WFSE then implements the chosen course, selecting the right modification tools and employing them to achieve the desired effect. Sensors detect the change and feed data on the new weather pattern to the modeling system, which updates its forecast accordingly. The WFSE checks the effectiveness of its efforts by pulling down the updated current conditions and new forecasts from the GWN and Local Weather Data Network, and plans follow on missions as needed. This concept illustrated in Figure 3-2. Another fun clip art. That one's even more awesome. Those F-117s little bit about me. I own a computer company that has that F-117 as a logo. Long story for how that ties in some of the onslaughts our own family, my own person has endured. That design, which I actually have a patent for. In any case, information systems, information warfare, masking our capabilities. Let's read that. A product of the information age, this system, which is the GWN. What's the GWN? Did I read that yet? Yeah, I did read you what that was, I believe. Well, we'll use that acronym. I hate acronyms. A product of the information age, this system would be most vulnerable to information warfare. Each WFSE would need the most current defensive and offensive information capabilities available. Defensive abilities would be necessary for survival. Offensive abilities could provide spoofing options to create virtual weather in the enemy's sensory and information systems, making it more likely for them to make decisions producing results for our choosing rather than theirs. It would also allow for the capability to mask or disguise our weather modification activities. And I'll read that again. It would also allow for the capability to mask or disguise our weather modification activities. So that single sentence to me puts the nail in the coffin for all those anti-conspiracists out there. I'll go ahead and read it again. It would also allow for the capability to mask or disguise our weather modification activities. That's the nail in the coffin, folks. 2 key technologies are necessary to meld an integrated, comprehensive, responsive, precise, and effective weather modification system. Advances in the science of chaos are critical in this endeavor. Also key to the feasibility of such a system is the ability to model the extremely complex, nonlinear system of global weather in ways that can accurately predict the outcome of changes in the influencing variables. Researchers have already successfully controlled single variable nonlinear systems in the lab and hypothesized that current mathematical techniques and computer capability could handle systems with up to 5 variables. That's pretty sad by today's standards. Advances in these 2 areas would make it feasible to affect regional weather patterns by making small continuous nudges to one or more influencing factors. Conceivably, with enough lead time and the right conditions, you could get made-to-order weather. Katrina comes to mind. And I'm gonna pause reading really quick and present you with something that keeps popping in my mind really quick. I wasn't even going to show you this, but I'm going to go ahead. Duplicate. Global warming. I've been thinking about this stuff a long time, boys, ladies and gentlemen. This was written in July of 2020. I encourage you to check it out. Whereby it's ironic, isn't it, the synchronicity of life? I never thought I'd be reading this article to you. I never thought I'd be starting a media company around it. This is actually part 1. I had already showed you part 2, that canal story. Part 2 is that canal story. But I talk about being able to control the weather with underground wells and how we're suppressing the healthy flow of water, whereby we are actually creating deserts. And whereby I say conserve, conserve, conserve is a lie. I believe that now more than ever. And my family actually just watched this movie again, Lawrence of Arabia. Well, we watched portions of it. It's a, back then they made decent movies, so you didn't have to constantly, every 5 seconds, make sure that you weren't going to get in trouble with your kids seeing a bunch of graphic material. It's mostly just a beautiful epic, you know. But even back then, there's undertones of them trying to control that narrative. And this quote, the famous Nestle quote, "Water is not a human right." Remember that next time when you want to buy a Nestle product. And I played around with my well at the time. I turned all the electricity off, and I ran this here.
This is a video I'm doing for an article I'm writing on forum.chgcoin.org.
Hooked it right up to that hose.
We're looking at the polarity of... Oh, I got a zero again, sorry.
And I actually had trouble zeroing it because if I got close to that hose while I zeroed it,
We'll let that air go.
It would have trouble calibrating. Is this the... I think 2 out of 2 was a better... This I had a problem with the control.
Before, for posterity, it was measuring negative 0.2, so it looks like it's a little higher than it was before. Now, there could be playing in the well pump.
Yeah, I went and turned off the well pump to make sure.
Okay, I've turned the pump off, so now we should get results only from the residual pressure, the water coming out of the aquifer. Let's see what happens. Minus 0.66.
Pretty interesting article. Encourage you to check it out.
You have Christians.
Let's watch this really quick.
You have Christians, Jews, Muslims. You have 50 pairs of oxen. This is a poor and dusty place.
What we do not have is water.
سيدي خد معي.
هيئتهم
Right. Stone the walls.
Watch what happens to the desert. And I know this is just a movie, but use your imagination, use your mind, your beautiful mind, to ascertain the truth of the matter.
يا سيدي تعال معي.
That, of course, was from Kingdom of Heaven. Check that article out. Moving right along. Okay, that's where I had read. And this talks about mostly reconnaissance. I don't care too much about reconnaissance in terms of the weather myself. Parameters. Developing a true weather modification capability will require various intervention tools to adjust the appropriate meteorological parameters in predictable ways. But yeah, that reconnaissance, such a system would contain a sensor array and localized battle area data net to provide the fine level of resolution required to detect intervention effects and provide feedback. This net would include air, ground, maritime, and space sensors as well as human observations in order to ensure the reliability and responsiveness of the system, even in the event of enemy countermeasures. So I would infer that those reconnaissance are great to have, but not required if you were to have a continuation of these protocols by rogue sects of our own military. I don't think they would need that reconnaissance, if you ask me. Chapter 4, Concept of Operations. The essential ingredient of the weather modification system is the set of intervention techniques used to modify the weather. The number of specific intervention methodologies is limited only by the imagination, but with few exceptions, they involve infusing either energy or chemicals into the meteorological process in the right way, at the right place and time. Did you hear that? The intervention could be designed to modify the weather in a number of ways, such as influencing clouds and precipitation, storm intensity, climate, space, or fog. Precipitation. For centuries, man has desired the ability to influence precipitation at the time and place of his choosing. Until recently, success in achieving this goal has been minimal. However, a new window of opportunity may exist, resulting from development of new technologies and an increasing world interest in relieving water shortages through precipitation enhancement. Consequently, we advocate that the DoD explore the many opportunities and also ramifications resulting from development of a capability to influence precipitation or conducting selective precipitation modification. Although the capability to influence precipitation over the long term, i.e. for more than several days, is still not fully understood, by 2025 we will certainly be capable of increasing or decreasing precipitation over the short term in a localized area. Before discussing research in this area, it is important to describe the benefits of such a capability. While many military operations may be influenced by precipitation, ground mobility is most affected. Influencing precipitation could prove useful in two ways. First, enhancing precipitation could decrease the enemy's trafficability by muddying terrain while also affecting their morale. Second, suppressing precipitation could increase friendly trafficability by drying out an otherwise muddied area. What is the possibility of developing this capability and applying it to tactical operations by 2025? Closer than one might think. Research has been conducted in precipitation modification for many years, and an aspect of the resulting technology was applied to operations during the Vietnam War. These initial attempts provide a foundation for further development of a true capability for selective precipitation modification. Interestingly enough, the U.S. government made a conscious decision to stop building upon this foundation. As mentioned earlier, international agreements have prevented the U.S. from investigating weather modification operations that could have widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects. However, possibilities do exist within the boundaries of established treaties for using localized precipitation modification over the short term with limited and potentially positive results. And this to me reads, well, they may or may not be obfuscating. These possibilities, and to me it reads, I might add, that they are obfuscating, at least these rogue sects of the military. These possibilities date back to our previous experimentation with precipitation modification, as stated in an article appearing in the Journal of Applied Meteorology. Nearly all the weather modification efforts over the last quarter century have been aimed at producing changes on the cloud scale through exploitation of the saturated vapor pressure difference between ice and water. This is not to be criticized, but it is time we also considered the feasibility of weather modification on other time-space scales and with other physical hypotheses. Oh my goodness. This study by William M. Gray, ETAL, I always read that, but I never knew how to pronounce it, et al., and investigated the hypothesis that significant beneficial influences can be derived through judicious exploitation of the solar absorption potential of carbon black dust. That's citation number 3. The study ultimately found that this technology could be used to enhance rainfall on the mesoscale, generate cirrus clouds, and enhance cumulonimbus or thunderstorm clouds in otherwise dry areas. The technology can be described as follows. Just as black tar roof easily absorbs solar energy and subsequently radiates heat during a sunny day, carbon black also readily absorbs solar energy. When the dispersed in microscopic or dust form in the air over a large body of water, the carbon becomes hot and heats the surrounding air, thereby increasing the amount of evaporation from the body of water below. As the surrounding air heats up, parcels of air will rise, and the water vapor contained in the rising air parcel will eventually condense to form clouds. Over time, the cloud droplets increase in size as more and more water vapor condenses, and eventually they become too large and heavy to stay suspended and will fall as rain or other forms of precipitation. That to me reads hail. The study points out that this precipitation enhancement technology would work best upwind from coastlines with onshore flow. Lake effect snow along the southern edge of the Great Lakes is a naturally occurring phenomenon based on similar dynamics. And I will add, what about mountainsides? Can this type of precipitation enhancement technology have military applications? Yes, if the right conditions exist. For example, if we are fortunate enough to have a fairly large body of water available upwind from the targeted battlefield, carbon dust could be placed in the atmosphere over that water. Assuming the dynamics are supportive in the atmosphere, the rising saturated air will eventually form clouds and rain showers downwind over the land. Now, citation number 5. While the likelihood of having a body of water located upwind of the battlefield is unpredictable, the technology could prove enormously useful under the right conditions. Only further experimentation will determine to what degree precipitation enhancement can be controlled. If precipitation enhancement techniques are successfully developed and the right natural conditions also exist, we must also be able to disperse carbon dust into the desired location. Transporting it in a completely controlled, safe, cost-effective, and reliable manner requires innovation. Numerous dispersal techniques have already been studied, but most convenient, safe, and cost-effective method discussed is the use of afterburner-type jet engines to generate carbon particles while flying through the targeted air. This method is based on ingestion of liquid hydrocarbon fuel in the afterburner's combustion gases. This direct generation method was found to be more desirable than other plausible method, i.e. the transport of large quantities of previously produced and properly sized carbon dust to the desired altitude. Chemtrails. The carbon dust study demonstrated that small-scale, or even crop dusting, the carbon dust study demonstrated that small-scale precipitation enhancement is possible and has been successfully verified under certain atmospheric conditions. Since the study was conducted, no known military applications of this technology have been realized. However, We can postulate how this technology might be used in the future by examining some of the delivery platforms conceivably available for effective dispersal of carbon, dust, or other effective modification agents in the year 2025. One method we propose would further maximize the technology's safety and reliability by virtually eliminating the human element. To date, much work has been done on UAVs, which can closely, if not completely, match the capabilities of piloted aircraft. If this UAV technology were combined with stealth and carbon dust technologies, the result could be a UAV aircraft invisible to radar while en route to the targeted area, which could spontaneously create carbon dust in any location. However, and I've heard also, I will add about using flak to deter radar, and so that's that vertical integration. However, minimizing the number of UAVs required to complete the mission would depend upon the development of a new and more efficient system to produce carbon dust by a follow-on technology to the afterburner type jet engines previously mentioned. In order to effectively use stealth technology, this system must also have the ability to disperse carbon dust while minimizing or eliminating the UAV's infrared heat source. In addition to using stealth UAV and carbon dust absorption technology for precipitation enhancement, this delivery method could also be used for precipitation suppression. Although the previously mentioned study did not significantly explore the possibility of cloud seeding for precipitation suppression, this possibility does exist. If clouds were seeded using chemical nuclei similar to those used today, or perhaps a more effective agent discovered through continued research before their downwind arrival to a desired location, the result could be a suppression of precipitation. In other words, precipitation could be forced to fall before its arrival in the desired territory, making the desired territory dry. The strategic and operational benefits of doing this have previously been discussed, and I would add, you can also make it dump heavily where you want. This talks about fog. That has undertones to me of fog and fog of war. I want to try to stay in scope, so I'm going to skip fog. Space weather modification. Boy, I am curious about that one. Oh, that's actually very important. That is actually very important. So I'm going to read that also. But first, I'm going to read. I'm glad I was curious about that, because that's sort of exactly what we needed to talk about that HAARP. Any case, storms. The desirability to modify storms to support military objectives is the most aggressive and controversial type of weather modification. The damage caused by storms is indeed horrendous. For instance, a tropical storm has an energy equal to 10,000 1 megaton hydrogen bombs. That's citation 18. Boy, Katrina sure comes to mind, doesn't it? And in 1992, Hurricane Andrew, here we go. Hurricane Andrew totally destroyed Homestead Air Force Base, Florida, caused the evacuation of most military aircraft in the southeastern U.S., and resulted in $15.5 billion of damage. However, as one would expect, based on a storm's energy level, current scientific literature indicates that there are definite physical limits on mankind's ability to modify storm systems. By taking this into account, along with political, environmental, economic, legal, and moral considerations, we will confine our analysis of storms to localized thunderstorms, and thus do not consider major storm systems such as hurricanes or intense low-pressure systems. Boy, I wonder if they could just lasso an existing storm, though, and just steer it. They don't need to create it, they just need to steer it. At any instance, there are approximately 2,000 thunderstorms taking place. In fact, 45,000 thunderstorms which contain heavy rain, hail, there's that hail word, microbursts, wind shear, and lightning form daily. Anyone who has flown frequently on commercial aircraft has probably noticed the extremes that pilots will go to avoid thunderstorms. The danger of thunderstorms was clearly shown in August 1985 when a jumbo jet crashed, killing 137 people after encountering microburst wind shears during a rain squall. This to me implies they can even weaponize this against commercial aircraft. What do you think? These forces of nature impact all aircraft, and even the most advanced fighters of 1996 make every attempt to avoid a thunderstorm. Will bad weather remain an aviation hazard in 2025? The answer, unfortunately, is yes. But projected advances in technology over the next 30 years will diminish the hazard potential. Computer-controlled flight systems will be able to autopilot aircraft through rapidly changing winds. This gives clues as to how they are shielding themselves, their own aircraft. Aircraft are envisioned to have hardened electronics that can withstand the effects of lightning strikes and may also have the capability to generate a surrounding electropotential field that will neutralize or repel lightning strikes. That's fascinating. Bet you they're doing that. Assuming that the U.S. achieves, I think they mentioned earlier that they really wanted to do that as well. Assuming that the U.S. achieves some or all of the above outlined aircraft technical advances and maintains the technological weather edge over its potential adversaries, we can next look at how we could modify the battle space weather to make the best use of our technical advantage. Weather modification technologies might involve techniques that would increase latent heat release in the atmosphere, provide additional water vapor for cloud cell development, and provide additional surface and lower atmospheric heating to increase atmospheric instability. Critical to the success of any attempt to trigger a storm cell is the pre-existing atmospheric conditions locally and regionally. The atmosphere must already be conditionally unstable, and the large-scale dynamics must be supportive of vertical cloud development. The focus of the weather modification effort would be to provide additional conditions that would make the atmosphere unstable enough to generate cloud and eventually storm cell development. The path of storm cells, once developed or enhanced, is dependent not only on the mesoscale dynamics of the storm, but the regional and synoptic or global scale atmospheric wind flow patterns in the area, which are currently not subject to human control. As indicated, the technical hurdles for storm development in support of military operations are obviously greater than enhancing precipitation or dispersing fog, as described earlier. One area of storm research would significantly benefit military operations is lightning modification. Most research efforts are being conducted to develop techniques to lessen the occurrence of hazards associated with lightning. This is important research for military operations and resource protection, but some offensive military benefit could be attained by doing research on increasing the potential and intensity of lightning. That's fascinating. Concepts to explore include increasing the basic efficiency of the thunderstorm, simulating the triggering mechanism that initiates the bolt, and triggering lightning such as that which struck Apollo 12 in 1968. And I will add allegedly. Possible mechanisms to investigate would be ways to modify the electropotential characteristics over certain targets to induce lightning strikes on the desired targets as the storm passes over their location. In summary, the ability to modify battle space weather through storm cell triggering or enhancement would allow us to exploit the technological weather advances of our 2025 aircraft. This area has tremendous potential and should be addressed by future research and concept development programs. Okay, now we're on to what I said we must read, I think. It's going to be a while till we get there, but this is important too. Exploitation of near space for space control. This section discusses opportunities for control and modification of the ionosphere and near space environment for force enhancement, specifically to enhance our own communications, sensing, and navigation capabilities and/or impair those of our enemy. A brief technical description of the ionosphere and its importance in current communications systems is provided in Appendix A. By 2025, it may be possible to modify the ionosphere in near space, creating a variety of potential applications as discussed below. However, before ionospheric modification becomes possible, a number of evolutionary advances in space weather forecasting and observation are needed. Many of these needs were described in Spacecast 2020 in a Spacecast 2020 study, Space Weather Support for Communications, citation 23. Some of the suggestions from this study are included in Appendix B. It is important to note that our ability to exploit near space via active modification is dependent on successfully achieving reliable observation and prediction capabilities. And then it says opportunities afforded by space weather modification. Modification of the near space environment is crucial to battlespace dominance. General Charles Horner, a former Commander-in-Chief, United States Space Command, described his worst nightmare as seeing an entire Marine battalion wiped out on some foreign landing zone because he was unable to deny the enemy intelligence and imagery generated from space. Active modification could provide a technological fix to jam the enemy's active and passive surveillance and reconnaissance systems. In short, an operational capability to modify the near space environment would ensure space superiority in 2025. What? That's wow. In short, it says an operational capability to modify the near space environment would ensure space superiority in 2025. This capability will allow us to shape and control the battle space via enhanced communication, sensing, navigation, and precision engagement systems. And maybe my imagination was running wild, but I was thinking about, field distortions. I was thinking about, in that context, being able to actually manipulate what is seen in that locale, presumably through some kind of electromagnetic manipulation. In any case, while we recognize that technological advances may negate the importance of certain electromagnetic frequencies for U.S. aerospace forces in 2025, such as radio frequency RF, high frequency HF, and very high frequency bands VHF, the capabilities described below are nevertheless relevant. Our non-peer adversaries will most likely still depend on such frequencies for communications, sensing, navigation, and would thus be extremely vulnerable to disrupt via space weather modification. And they've used that as their end-all be-all cover narrative, if it wasn't clear by now. Communications dominance via ionospheric modification. Modifications of the ionosphere to enhance or disrupt communications has recently become the subject of active research. According to Lewis M. Duncan and Robert L. Schoen, the former Soviet Union FSU conducted theoretical and experimental research in this area at a level considerably greater than comparable programs in the West, citation 25. There is a strong motivation for this research because induced ionospheric modifications may influence or even disrupt the operation of radio systems relying on propagation through the modified region, the controlled generation or accelerated dissipation of ionospheric disturbances may be used to produce new propagation paths otherwise unavailable, appropriate for selected RF missions. A number of methods have been explored or proposed to modify the ionosphere, including injection of chemical vapors and heating or charging via electromagnetic radiation or particle beams such as ions, neutral particles, X-rays, MEV particles, and energetic electrons. Citation 27. It is important to note that many techniques to modify the upper atmosphere have been successfully demonstrated experimentally. Ground-based modification techniques employed by the FSU include vertical HF heating, oblique HF heating, microwave heating, magnetospheric modification, citation 28. Significant military applications of such operations include low-frequency or LF communication production, HF ducted communications, and creation of an artificial ionosphere, discussed in detail below. Moreover, developing countries also recognize the benefit of ionospheric modification. In the early 1980s, Brazil conducted an experiment to modify the ionosphere by chemical injection. So they've been doing it since the 80s. at least. Several high payoff capabilities that could result from the modification of the ionosphere or near space are described briefly below. It should be emphasized that this list is not comprehensive. Modification of the ionosphere is an area rich with potential applications, and there are also likely spin-off applications that have yet to be envisioned. And that's that vertical integration, folks. Vertical integration. Ionospheric mirrors for pinpoint communication over the horizon, or OTH, radar transmission. The properties and limitations of the ionosphere as a reflecting medium for high frequency radiation are described in Appendix A. The major disadvantage in depending on the ionosphere to reflect radio waves is its variability, which is due to normal space weather and events such as solar flares and geomagnetic storms. The ionosphere has been described as a crinkled sheet of wax paper whose relative position rises and sinks depending on weather conditions. The surface topography of the crinkled paper also constantly changes, leading to variability in its reflective, refractive, and transmissive properties. In my own work, folks, that I've done with inverter modulation, that to me makes more sense as far as their need for surveillance of their own, of what's going on with the weather. You need to have some kind of a feedback mechanism whereby your equipment is able to scan and modulate the local ionosphere. That makes perfect sense. If you don't have a way to pick up what you laid down, then you're going to have more chaos and less control, essentially. Creation of an artificial uniform ionosphere was first proposed by Soviet research A.V. Jurovic in mid-1970s. An artificial ionospheric mirror, AIM, would serve as a precise mirror for electromagnetic radiation of a selected frequency or range of frequencies. It would thereby be useful for both pinpoint control of friendly communications and interception of enemy transmissions. This concept has been described in detail by Paul A. Cozy et al. I will have to look up how to pronounce that, in a paper entitled Artificial Ionospheric Mirrors, or AIM. The authors describe how one could precisely control the location and height of the region of artificially produced ionization using crossed microwave or MW beams, which produce atmospheric breakdown or ionization of neutral species. Boy, I wonder how that would affect the human physiology. That doesn't seem like a good idea. The implications of such control are enormous. One would no longer be subject to the vagaries of the natural ionosphere, but would instead have direct control of the propagation environment. Ideally, the AIM would be rapidly created and then would be maintained only for a brief operational period. A schematic depicting the crossbeam approach for generation of an AIM is shown in Figure 4-1, citation 31. An AIM could theoretically reflect radio waves with frequencies up to 2 GHz, which is nearly 2 orders of magnitude higher than those waves reflected by the natural ionosphere. The MW radiator power requirements for such a system are roughly an order of magnitude greater than 1992 state-of-the-art systems. However, by 2025, such a power capability is expected to be easily achievable. Yeah, they make a mirror out of 2 crossing beams, it looks like, per the animation if you can't see it. Clip art. Oh, there's that Microsoft company. That's interesting. Figure 4-1, crossbeam approach for generating an artificial ionospheric mirror. I'll let you look at the nice colors, nice drawing while I read this. Besides providing pinpoint communication control and potential interception capability, this technology would also provide communication capability at specified frequencies as desired. I can tell you right now that's how they're doing that invisibility cloak shield thing. Interesting story. When I was living up there in Teller County, not once but twice, there was a low-flying aircraft, and I mean he was flying right over me. He was buzzing me just to mess with me. And I couldn't see him. And so comes to mind what we read prior about that force field. I bet you anything They have force field that can at least cloak, but maybe even provide an actual force field. It's not so far-fetched. Do you realize that there is a lot of breakaway technology? And I certainly witnessed it myself when that low-flying aircraft could not be witnessed. Something was cloaking him. In any case, that's not the content of this verbiage, so I'll continue. Figure 4-2 shows how a ground-based radiator